After 10 years of explaining Star Wars online, I've come across the same questions again and again. Today I'm posting a compilation video answering well over 100 of the most frequently asked questions I've seen about the sequel Star Wars Trilogy.
This will begin to make things right.
Who was Lor San Tekka? He was an old friend to Luke Skywalker and Ben Solo. He wasn't Force-sensitive, but followed the Church of the Force like many of his ancestors in the San Tekka clan. After the fall of the Empire, he helped Luke gather artifacts and research from the Jedi of old, traveling to Jedi outposts on worlds like Elphrona. Together, they gathered many clues to the location of the first Jedi Temple. Shortly before the events of The Force Awakens, Leia reached out to Lor San Tekka for help discovering her missing brother's location. It wasn't long before he contacted the Resistance and requested a meeting on Jakku.
Come on, BB-8, hurry!
Where was Poe's Black X-Wing at the start of The Force Awakens? The Poe Dameron comics by Charles Soule show us that the pilot used his special X-Wing on a mission to Cato Nemoidia to rescue Lor San Tekka. While he was there, the starfighter was stolen by a First Order agent who used it against the rest of his squadron. But BB-8 was able to sabotage her controls, sending it crashing into the city below. Its remains were recovered and moved to the Raddus, where it began repairs. They weren't complete by the time of Poe's mission to Jakku, but the ship was ready to fly again for the Battle of Takodana. Who was the stormtrooper Poe shot? He was a character in Finn's story in the book Before the Awakening. There we get to meet a handful of other stormtroopers in Finn's squad. FN-2003 was nicknamed Slip because he consistently fell behind the performance of the rest of his group during training, but FN-2187 would go out of his way to help the struggling trooper, which earned him a reprimand from Captain Phasma. We can see that connection stuck with FN-2187, and Slip's violent death helped Finn realize he needed to escape the First Order.
So, the villagers.
Why does Captain Phasma have special armor? The novel Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson tells that story. Before joining the First Order, Phasma lived on a deadly planet called Parnassos. A First Order ship crashed there, and among the survivors was Brindle Hux, the father of General Armitage Hux. Phasma helped him survive and escape the planet, and the Elder Hux was impressed with her brutality. He offered her a place in the First Order, training new stormtroopers, and she accepted. Eventually, she returned to her homeworld in the crashed ship, which was one of the Emperor's old Naboo yachts. She used some of its chromium to create her own unique set of stormtrooper armor befitting her station. What happened on Jakku? Why are there crashed Star Destroyers all over the place? Jakku was the site of the devastating final battle of the Galactic Civil War between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance turned New Republic. It took place 1 year after the supposed death of the Emperor and the destruction of the second Death Star at the Battle of Endor. It was also the culmination of Operation Cinder, a set of orders Palpatine recorded and delivered in a message after his death. Both Imperial and New Republic forces were lured to Jakku, where Palpatine had agents ready to destroy the planet to wipe out friend and foe alike. The plot was stopped thanks to the efforts of an Imperial Grand Admiral named Ray Sloane and a New Republic pilot named Nora Wexley. Sloane escaped and gathered a select group of Imperial survivors to rendezvous in the unknown regions. Those that were left behind surrendered to the New Republic, and the Galactic Civil War came to an end. How long was Rey left on Jakku? She was living there on her own for about 13 years, although her family lived there for a time before they disappeared. At the age of 6, Sith agents began searching for Rey, so her family desperately left her in the temporary care of Unkar Plutt. They left a trail away from Jakku, but the Sith assassin Ochi of Bestoon caught up with and murdered them. From the age of 6 to the age of 19, Rey was forced to raise herself, living as a scavenger on the desert world.
I won't have you question my methods.
What were General Hux's origins? Armitage was the bastard son of the Imperial Brindle Hux, born 1 year before the destruction of the first Death Star. He grew up friendless, unloved, and abused by his father. At the age of only 6, he was given command of a group of child soldiers during the Battle of Jakku, and he was part of the Imperial remnant that fled into the unknown regions after the Empire's surrender. Brindle Hux was part of the Shadow Council that sought to restore the Empire to power through Grand Admiral Thrawn's return, but their efforts ultimately failed, and instead the Imperial remnant became the First Order. Armitage continued to rise in power, training the new breed of stormtrooper, and he one day got revenge on his father, murdering Brindle with the help of Captain Phasma.
Reported to my division, was evaluated and sent to reconditioning.
What is First Order reconditioning? Captain Phasma claims Finn was scheduled for it before he defected. The Star Wars Resistance episode, The New Trooper, built on that concept a bit. After Kazuda Xiono goes undercover as a stormtrooper and the other troopers notice his odd behavior, he is also scheduled for reconditioning, but other more sinister terms are thrown around that include mental wipe, reprogramming, and brain scrape. Whatever reconditioning actually entailed, it didn't sound pleasant. I imagine it would involve a device similar to the Mind Flayer that we saw used on Dr. Pershing in The Mandalorian Season 3.
I can do this. I can do this.
How did Rey learn to fly? Rey made her home inside a fallen AT-AT walker from the Battle of Jakku. Inside, she kept a salvaged flight console from a downed Y-Wing from the same battle. She was able to use it to run flight simulations as an introduction to piloting. As she says in the movie, she also had some experience flying for real, although she had never left the planet. In the book Before the Awakening, Rey and 2 other scavengers worked to repair an old light freighter back into flying condition. She flew it back to Nema Outpost, but the other 2 scavengers stole it from her as soon as they landed. We can also see that she has an adjustment period with the Millennium Falcon, struggling to take off and knocking into debris in the Graveyard of Giants. I imagine the Force gave her some assistance in that flight as well.
That's mine!
What happened to Unkar Plutt? His story continued in the Force Awakens novelization and deleted scenes. He tracked the Millennium Falcon to Takodana and attempted to strong-arm Rey into coming back to Jakku to pay for the damage she caused, but Chewbacca stepped in and ripped the junk boss's arm off, tossing it across the room, which was strictly against Maz Kanata's no fighting rule within the walls of her castle, but she probably made an exception for her boyfriend. Why is Kylo Ren's lightsaber unstable? Red lightsabers are made through a process called bleeding. A dark side user pours their anger and hatred into the kyber crystal, filling it with the dark side, twisting it, and turning it red in color. When Ben Solo bled his crystal, he damaged it, leaving it cracked and unstable. He had to modify his lightsaber design with vents to allow extra energy to escape, or else the weapon would overload. The new lightsaber happened to match ancient Jedi crossguard lightsabers. The crackling, unstable blade is also a symbol of Kylo Ren's own instability and unbalanced nature. According to Lucasfilm art manager Phil Shostak, the blade was also inspired by the original poster for Star Wars, which featured Luke Skywalker's lightsaber releasing similar beams of energy.
Who had it? Duquesne?
How did Han Solo lose the Millennium Falcon? Not long after the Battle of Endor, Han and Chewbacca took part in the liberation of Kashyyyk from Imperial control. With his homeworld freed, Chewie decided to spend some time with his family, leaving Han without his trusty co-pilot. One day at Maz Kanata's castle, he mentioned needing some help and wound up hiring a young man named Gannis Duquesne. While Han was preoccupied, Duquesne stole the ship and used it to make a name for himself. He eventually realized the errors of his ways and planned to return the ship to Solo, but it was stolen from him by the Irving boys before he could. It's unclear how long Han was separated from his ship. Wikipedia estimates it's only been 3 years, but I believe the comic and The Force Awakens suggest the Millennium Falcon had been in Unkar Plutt's possession for quite a while. Okay, how did Han Solo find the Millennium Falcon? On Takodana, Han tells Rey it wasn't mere chance that he found his old ship, but the novelization tells us a little more. After learning the ship had been sitting on Jakku, Han tells Chewie, "Told you we should have double-checked the western reaches. Just lucky we were in the general vicinity when the ship powered up and its beacon snapped on." So Han and Chewie were always monitoring space for the Millennium Falcon's transponder and got a ping when Rey and Finn stole it from Unkar Plutt.
Don't tell me a Rathor's got loose.
How and why did Han Solo capture the Rathtars? The LEGO Force Awakens game covers at least part of that story. The LEGO games aren't strictly canon, but it's what we've got now, and I see no reason why it can't be a silly version of what actually happened. Han and Chewie were hired by King Prana, the monarch of the Kabarith cluster, who had his own private zoo. He wanted Rathtars, and so Han and Chewie traveled to their homeworld Tuan Keti. Aided by a team of mercenaries led by a man named Varind Jellic, they fought through dangerous plant life as well as agents of a rival of Prana's named Regent Sokolvis, who tried to capture the Rathtars first. The LEGO game ends with the successful collection of one Rathtar. I assume the rest of the mercenaries perished in the capture of the other 2.
Han Solo, you're a dead man.
Who was the Guavian Death Gang? They were originally a criminal group from the core worlds that were so ruthless the other major syndicates chased them into the Outer Rim. Their red-armored troops received cybernetic enhancements that included a second mechanical heart that pumped chemicals into their blood that made them hyper-aggressive. They allied themselves with the First Order even after the destruction of the New Republic, fighting against the citizens of the Colossus in Star Wars Resistance. Their armor design was taken from concept art that was originally intended for the Jedi killer of Episode 7, the character that would become Kylo Ren.
Tell that to Kanja Club.
What was Kanja Club? They were a criminal syndicate that began as a group of renegade Hutt slaves from the planet Narkanji. They were led by Tasu Leech, who rose to prominence during the Galactic Civil War. He was a pit fighter and assassin that was hired by the bounty hunter Tonga to protect a young girl who had become the center of a syndicate war on Corellia. He never really bonded with the rest of his crew, although he did enjoy committing acts of violence alongside them. He narrowly survived a battle with the leader of the Knights of Ren before the Force wielders fell under the control of Kylo Ren. When the citizens of Narkanji revolted against the Hutts, Tasu Leech defeated several opponents to prove himself the leader of the newly formed Kanja Club. Are Kylo Ren or Snoke members of the Sith Order? When the movie originally came out, J.J. Abrams was adamant that they were not. They were new darkside users. So I think my answer to this question is to agree and say that they are not Sith. However, I have to admit this issue got muddled after the release of The Rise of Skywalker, which showed Snoke to be a creation of Palpatine's as a way to manipulate Ben Solo. And giving Kylo Ren a master to defeat and rise above as he does in The Last Jedi is a very Sith rule of two thing to do. So Snoke was being controlled, or at the very least led by a Sith Lord, but I don't think Kylo Ren thought of himself as a Sith or was actively and openly being taught the ways of the Sith.
Master of the Knights of Ren.
How did Kylo Ren become the leader of the Knights of Ren? Ben Solo first met the Knights of Ren when he was a Jedi in training. He and Luke Skywalker encountered them while they searched for Jedi relics, and the Jedi Master handily defeated them. Ben sought them out after he destroyed his uncle's Jedi Academy, seeking a place in the dark side of the Force. At that point, the Knights were led by a man simply named Ren. The young Solo was chased by the survivors of Luke's academy, and after Ren killed one of his childhood friends, Ben struck him down in a rage. Seeing his immense power, the other Knights bowed to the man that would take the name Kylo Ren. Who was Maz Kanata? She was a pirate queen that was born nearly 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, shortly after the end of the Sith Wars. For the following century or so, she gained notoriety and established her castle on Takodana. She was Force-sensitive, and despite her status as a pirate, she had a good relationship with the Jedi outpost that was also on the planet. During the High Republic era, she fought against a rival pirate group called the Dank Grax, who aligned themselves against the Jedi. Over 100 years later, another anti-Jedi group called the Nihil attacked and destroyed the outpost on Takodana, and Maz again fought alongside her Jedi friends. After the rise of the Galactic Empire, Maz hid her abilities in the Force and hired a mercenary to destroy data files the Empire had collected on her. After the fall of the Jedi, she collected relics of the Order and kept them safe in her castle.
Where's my boyfriend?
Did Maz Kanata and Chewbacca really date? No, how dare you think that? Chewie has been a happily married Wookiee for decades. But seriously, I have seen this question a lot. Maz obviously just has a fondness for Chewie, like we all do, and she chooses to express that in a flirtatious way, even when he's not around. In the book Force Collector, she tells the main character about a very handsome Wookiee, saying, "We're very fond of one another, don't let anyone tell you different." I think the joke is that the attraction is one-sided, but Chewbacca doesn't let that get in the way of their friendship, as seen in Forces of Destiny.
Grandfather.
How did Kylo Ren get Darth Vader's helmet? It was likely retrieved for him by a character seen in The Force Awakens, Bazine Natal. The short story, The Perfect Weapon by Delilah Dawson, takes place 5 years before Episode 7. In it, we learn Bazine's history and see her on a mission to find a former stormtrooper who served in the Battle of Endor. She steals a mysterious package from his belongings at the request of her client, who sounds an awful lot like Kylo Ren in the audiobook. It's not fully confirmed, but I believe the stormtrooper likely stumbled across Vader's funeral pyre after the Battle of Endor and took the helmet as a grim souvenir. He kept it until he died. It was taken by Bazine, who delivered it to Kylo Ren. Who was the Crimson Corsair? He's another classic Star Wars background character with a cool helmet. His real name was Sidon Athano, and he was a pirate in the Outer Rim known for wearing a distinctive Kaleesh mask. General Grievous likely would have worn something similar before becoming a cyborg. The coolest part about his crew is that it contained the last living clone trooper, Kix, who served as the medic in the 501st during the Clone Wars. The Crimson Corsair sought a lost treasure of Count Dooku's that wound up being the clone who was captured by the Sith and held in stasis after learning the truth of Order 66. As a pirate, Sidon definitely made some shady dealings, as seen in Star Wars Resistance, but he ultimately wound up joining the fight against the Sith in the Battle of Exegol.
This fierce machine which you have built.
What planet was Starkiller Base built into? This is one of my favorite Star Wars mysteries that was revealed slowly over time until finally being confirmed in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Starkiller Base was once the planet Ilum, a sacred world to the Jedi where younglings would collect their first kyber crystals in a ritual called the Gathering. After the rise of the Empire, they learned of the secret planet's location, probably thanks to the fallen Jedi who had become Inquisitors. The Empire began construction on Ilum as early as 1 year after the end of the Clone Wars, and continued on for about 5 decades until it was finally completed. Its kyber-rich interior could be harnessed into terrible power, similar to the way the Death Star's super laser was also powered by kyber crystals. How did Starkiller Base work? I'll tell you what we know from Alan Dean Foster's Force Awakens novelization and reference books, but this is like the epitome of Star Wars being made up and in space. A series of collectors that were scattered around the planet were able to gather the energy of a nearby star. That energy would then be collected in the planet's core, held by a containment field. The weapon's thermal oscillator managed the immense power which otherwise would have destroyed the planet. When it was time to fire the weapon, the containment field was released and the beam was fired with enough force to tear a hole through hyperspace. That meant the target system would be destroyed mere moments later, and the beam and the destruction could be seen across the galaxy, sparking fear in all who witnessed it. Starkiller Base also had some sort of hyperdrive and could move from system to system to consume new stars to harness their power. What system did Starkiller Base destroy? It's quickly stated in the film, but it was the Hosnian system, which included the planet Hosnian Prime. At the time of The Force Awakens, it was the capital of the New Republic. After the fall of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic, it was decided to rotate the location of the Galactic Senate rather than permanently place it on the core world Coruscant once again. Chandrila, Coruscant, and Hosnian Prime all hosted the Senate throughout its life, all of which were still located in the core, but the expansion region world Nicadia was also one of the early rotating headquarters. But the fact that the Galactic Senate still largely favored the core was a sign that many of their changes were symbolic rather than truly effective. J.J. Abrams has mentioned that at one point it was considered to have Starkiller Base destroy Coruscant, but ultimately the planet was saved, and Hosnian Prime was created only to be destroyed in its place. Who is this character the camera focuses on during the destruction of Hosnian Prime? Her name was Corsella. She was part of the Resistance, and most of her scenes were left on the cutting room floor. The book Bloodline shows her working as an aide for Leia when she was still a senator. 6 years before the events of Episode 7, Leia became aware of the growing threat of the First Order and created the Resistance to act while the Senate ignored the problem. Cor joined Leia, and thanks to her experience in government, she became the political face of the Resistance. Leia had been labeled as a warmonger, and many allies turned their back on her once it became public that she was the daughter of Darth Vader. In the Force Awakens deleted scenes, Leia sends Cor to Hosnian Prime to urge the Senate to act as war with the First Order continues to escalate, and that's why she was present for the planet's destruction.
A good question. For another time.
How did Maz Kanata get Anakin's lightsaber? We still don't know the full story, but after being lost in Cloud City, it was recovered by an Ugnaught. I think it would make sense they would sell it on the black market, where it would eventually fall into the hands of the Pirate Queen. Star Wars Visions Volume 2 actually shows that kind of playing out, even though it can't be considered canon. In the Aardman short film, I Am Your Mother, we can see a shop selling several items that were once touched by Luke Skywalker. The lightsaber is present, and you can see Maz Kanata's hand steal it just before a Jawa tries the same thing.
Raider!
Who was TR-8R? That's the nickname the internet gave to the stormtrooper who calls Finn a traitor on Takodana, who then became a meme back when The Force Awakens first came out. His designation was FN-2199. He knew Finn personally, training alongside him for most of their lives as part of the same stormtrooper squad. Clearly, he took FN-2187's defection personally, which makes sense. His characterization in the book Before the Awakening showed him to be fairly friendly with Finn. He was probably very hurt when someone he trained with since they were children decided to abandon everything they were ever taught. That's something I wish the sequel trilogy explored more, the tragic fact that the First Order stormtroopers were all brainwashed children.
That's one hell of a pilot!
Is Poe Dameron Force sensitive, or is he just one hell of a pilot? The question of his connection to the Force popped up thanks to the Shattered Empire comics, where we learned that Poe's parents came to possess a piece of the Uneti tree that once stood in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. It was planted near his childhood home, and fans came to wonder if the tree could have affected him growing up. I don't think Poe is Force sensitive in the sense that he could feel a connection to the Force or control it or anything like that, but I personally think that when someone is in tune with themselves and their talents and they're using those talents for good, that is a way of connecting to the Force even if you don't know it. I think Poe was meant to fly. He knows he has power as a pilot, and he is using that power for good. So while I don't think he is Force sensitive, I can see the Force working through him, if that makes sense.
You probably don't recognize me because of the red arm.
How did C-3PO get his red arm? The C-3PO one-shot comic by James Robinson covers that, taking place about a year before The Force Awakens. On a mission to rescue a captured Admiral Akbar, 3PO and a handful of droids crash land on the planet Tal. One of the droids is a First Order prisoner named Omri. They all head for a homing beacon in the distance, and along the way, 3PO's arm is ripped off by a tentacled creature, and most of the droids are destroyed. Only Omri and C-3PO remain, and they're forced to take shelter from acid rain. The two droids bond over a philosophical discussion about their programming and purpose, and despite being supposed enemies, Omri ventures into the acid to activate the homing beacon to save 3PO. Poe Dameron arrives to rescue the protocol droid, and C-3PO takes Omri's arm to honor his sacrifice.
Poe Dameron, you're alive? Buddy.
How did Poe Dameron get off Jakku? This part of the story was told in the novelization for the movie, as well as the Poe Dameron comic series and LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens. Like he says in the movie, he was thrown from the crash. He wandered the desert until he was picked up by a scavenger who was friendly to the Resistance, or at least not friendly to the First Order. They made their way to Nema Outpost, and along the way, Poe helped fight off some raiders. Rey and Finn had already left in the Millennium Falcon, but the Scrapper was grateful for Poe's help and got him passage back to the Resistance base. From there, he left for Takodana almost immediately. What's the deal with Kylo Ren's ashtray? The short, in-universe answer is that Kylo Ren keeps his helmet on a table that contains the ashes of the enemies he's killed, which is so over the top, but makes sense for an edgelord like Kylo. The longer, behind-the-scenes answer is that moment was originally going to be for the scene when Kylo talks to Darth Vader's helmet. He was going to take his mask off in that scene, and the ash table was in his private quarters, which makes a lot more sense than having it in some random interrogation room. But J.J. Abrams liked the shot and the image, so he moved it to later in the movie.
And you'll drop your weapon?
And I'll drop my weapon.
How does Rey learn to use the Force to mind trick? She clearly knew stories of Luke Skywalker, the Jedi, and the Rebellion, so she probably had some idea of the Force and what it could do, even if she didn't know of its presence within her until her conversation with Maz Kanata. The Last Jedi novelization talks about how her mental opposition to Kylo Ren's mind probe allowed her to understand the Force and her own powers more fully. With the full hindsight of the completed sequel trilogy, I think we could also chalk up her natural abilities to being part of a dyad with Kylo, as well as her Palpatine heritage.
We tracked their reconnaissance ship to the Elenium system.
How did the First Order find the Resistance base? General Hux tells Snoke the First Order tracked the Resistance reconnaissance ship back to the Elenium system, but the Poe Dameron comic by Charles Soule tells that story in more detail. Snap Wexley and his wife, Carrie Coon, made the trip together, attempting a stealth recon run in a bare-bones ship that flew close enough to scan Starkiller Base. But the tiny ship nearly fell apart in the superweapons atmosphere, which may have alerted the First Order to the infiltration, allowing them to track the recon mission back to Dakar, maybe using the same technology seen in The Last Jedi to continue tracking the Resistance fleet through hyperspace.
You can't be so stupid as to think this will be easy.
Did Captain Phasma face any consequences for lowering Starkiller Base's shields? Nope. The Captain Phasma comic book takes place immediately after The Force Awakens and tells the story of how one First Order officer discovered who was responsible for lowering the shields. Phasma learns his identity and hunts him down with the help of a TIE fighter pilot. The Stormtrooper captain eventually kills her target and the woman who helped her to keep the secret safe. A deleted scene from The Last Jedi showed Finn calling her out in front of her own troops, causing her to shoot them all down as well. But since that's not actually in the movie, I would say Phasma got away with her betrayal. Why does Kylo Ren keep punching himself during his duel with Finn and Rey? I like to think it was to give him an edge in the fight. The Darth Bane trilogy of books goes into how Sith or other Darksiders can use their physical pain to fuel their rage and therefore their strength in the dark side of the Force. Bane himself wore living armor that caused him constant pain, which he twisted into power. Kylo Ren had just been shot by Chewie's bowcaster, which we've seen can do massive damage. He's honestly probably just hitting himself to fuel up with adrenaline, but I see no reason why he couldn't also be using that pain to strengthen his connection to the dark side of the Force. How does Rey beat Kylo Ren? I can think of so many reasons for this. First, he had just been shot by Chewie's bowcaster and was bleeding from the wound. Second, he didn't actually want to kill Rey, he wanted to teach her, an offer he makes in the movie. He was holding back during their fight. Third, and most important, he had just killed his own father, an act he hoped would give him strength in the dark side, but instead left him completely unbalanced. The Force Awakens novelization says following through on the act ought to have made him stronger. Instead, he found himself weakened. This is where Snoke himself places the blame on Kylo Ren's loss in The Last Jedi, chastising him for being beaten by a girl who had never held a lightsaber before. Why doesn't Leia hug Chewie after the loss of Han Solo? It was an unfortunate oversight, plain and simple. J.J. Abrams said, "That was probably one of the mistakes I made. Had Chewbacca not been where he was, you probably wouldn't have thought of it, but because he was right there and passed by Leia, it felt almost like a slight, which was definitely not the intention." Abrams went on to say that my thinking at the time was that Chewbacca, despite the pain he was feeling, was focused on trying to save Finn and getting him taken care of. To me, this is all kinda like Chewie getting his medal off-screen in A New Hope. I really wish we saw it happen in the movie, but I'm sure Leia and Chewie had a long hug off-screen the same way Chewie got his medal off-screen. Why does R2-D2 wake up from low power mode right at the end of the movie? Of course, the real reason is simply because that's what the story needed, and it was nice to have a character return after losing Han. But J.J. Abrams said his intent was to have BB-8's little moment with R2 earlier in the film be the catalyst for the Astromech's awakening. BB told R2 he had a piece of the map to Luke Skywalker, and so the older droid started searching his databanks for any information that might help. He finds it in the Imperial archives he accessed on the Death Star way back in A New Hope. The same archives Kylo Ren also tells Rey the First Order would have used to determine Skywalker's location if they either got the map from her or BB-8. R2-D2 found the relevant information, woke up, and together they pieced together the full map to Octo. Why is there a map to Luke Skywalker anyway? There isn't really, not in the sense that Luke left behind clues so he could be found. We learn in The Last Jedi that he wanted to remain hidden. As Han states, it was believed that Luke traveled to the first Jedi Temple, which was a secret to the rest of the galaxy. But Lor San Tekka helped Luke start to piece together its location. The information he gathered was able to be cross-referenced with data from R2-D2 collected from the Death Star, and the first Jedi Temple was found. So it was really a map to Octo, and the Resistance was crossing their fingers and hoping Luke would be there. Now let's move on to The Last Jedi.
A single light fighter.
Where was Black Squadron in Episode 8? We were introduced to pilots like Snap Wexley and Jess Pava in The Force Awakens, and they're nowhere to be seen in The Last Jedi. The Poe Dameron comics by Charles Soule revealed that they were sent on a mission to help recruit allies in the fight against the First Order. It didn't go great, and Poe actually had to head out to rescue them all from First Order sympathizers after the Battle of Crait. Of course, this was all figured out after the release of The Last Jedi, so why not just include them in the movie? I'm guessing here, but I think it's because Rian Johnson knew he was going to be killing off most of the Starfighter pilots pretty early in the film. Maybe he wanted to spare all those characters so they could have a chance to come back in Episode 9.
Bombers, keep that tight formation. Fighters, protect the bombers.
Who was Tali Lintra? Like many heroic pilots of Star Wars, Blue Leader has gained a fan following despite having very little screen time. Tali grew up on a farm on the planet Pip-Pip 3, learning how to fly in a classic A-Wing fighter that her family used as a crop duster. She joined the Resistance after seeing the New Republic's lackluster response to the growing threat of the First Order. Her piloting skills impressed Poe Dameron, so she was granted the rank of lieutenant and the call sign Blue Leader. Unfortunately, there aren't many stories about her outside of The Last Jedi, at least not yet.
Captain, Resistance bombers approaching.
Where were the Resistance bombers in the Battle of Starkiller Base? The real answer is that the ships hadn't been created yet, but the book Cobalt Squadron does give us an in-universe answer. Days before the events of The Force Awakens, the Resistance heard of First Order activity in the Atera system. The people there were suffering under First Order rule, and so the bombers of both Cobalt and Crimson Squadrons were sent on a mercy mission. Instead of bombs, they were loaded up with water, food, and other supplies that they dropped to the civilians before retreating. Their mission lasted several days, and while they were gone, the First Order unleashed Starkiller Base on the Hosnian system, and the Resistance was forced to destroy the superweapon without the aid of their bombers. Even if they were at the battle, their very slow speed probably would have made them a liability anyway. Why didn't the Resistance use Y-Wings to attack the First Order Dreadnought? They're bombers too. I think it comes down to the size of the bomber's payload. According to Star Wars Legends sources, one Y-Wing could carry up to 20 proton bombs. One MG-100 Star Fortress carried 1,048 proton bombs, so one Resistance bomber was the equivalent of over 50 Y-Wings. Of course, the trade-off is that the bombers were much slower, and Y-Wings already weren't known for their speed. Regardless, a single Resistance bomber packed enough punch to destroy an entire dreadnought. Also, the simple fact that we don't see any Y-Wings in the movie suggests to me that the Resistance didn't have any. Their ships were mostly hand-me-downs from the New Republic. Their X-Wings were an older model, the Raddus was scheduled for retirement before the Resistance took it. I guess nobody had volunteered to give up any Y-Wings until a year later when we saw them in the Rise of Skywalker. How can bombs fall in space? I don't understand why this gets asked so much when we first saw it in The Empire Strikes Back in 1980. But also, the Resistance bombers follow the basic rules of physics. It's established that there is a gravity generator in the ship, so when the bombs are released, they are affected by it, and then they fall out of the magnetic field and continue along their given path through space until they hit the First Order Dreadnought. That's how it should work.
Go away!
Why was Luke wearing Jedi robes when he first met Rey? Why was he just hanging out on a cliff dressed as a Jedi if he felt that the Jedi Order needed to end? The Last Jedi Visual Dictionary says Luke only wears those robes to go through one final Jedi rite. The Last Jedi novelization says that Luke has tried to burn down the Jedi library multiple times but couldn't bring himself to go through with it. The book also states that Rey interrupted one of his attempts, which is why he was wearing the robes at the start of the movie. I think Luke's intent was to burn down the tree and also become one with the Force. I think that was the final Jedi rite he planned to undergo, which would have ended the Jedi line as he wanted. But there was probably some nagging feeling that always stopped him because deep down he knew it wasn't the right path. What relics does Luke have in his hut? I'm sure he had several, but two are given more attention. The first is a Jedi Crusader pendant that held part of a Sith lightsaber crystal as a trophy. Jedi Crusaders were first mentioned in Legends in the Old Republic era as a group of renegade Jedi who followed Revan when he was still a Jedi Knight in his campaign against Mandalorian conquerors. The other relic was a star compass Luke recovered from one of Emperor Palpatine's vaults on the planet Pilio, which we can see in Battlefront 2. It's been referred to as the Jedi version of a Sith Wayfinder. The compass is at least partially responsible for Luke's ability to find Ahch-To in the first Jedi Temple. It's also cool to note that the relic was developed for the video game, sketched out by Dave Filoni, quickly created by the prop department, and then sent over to Rian Johnson to be included in the film, all within a week.
You were unbalanced.
What do we know about Snoke's history? He was the result of genetic experiments from Palpatine's DNA, basically like a non-identical clone called a strand cast. He was meant to be a vessel for Darth Sidious's spirit to inhabit, but the Emperor rejected the body and instead decided to use Snoke as a puppet. Maybe quite literally. It's unclear right now if Snoke had any autonomy of his own. Palpatine claims that he was the voice of Snoke to Kylo Ren, but also talks about manipulating Snoke in other sources. At some point, Snoke revealed himself to the Imperial Remnant and eliminated their leaders until he was the best option left to follow, and so they became the First Order. He also appeared to Luke Skywalker and Ben Solo as an ally in the Force for a time, but Skywalker eventually realized the deception, they fought, and Snoke was injured. Again, it's unclear what those injuries were, because Snoke's clones look like they were created to be disfigured. Either way, Snoke's time with the Jedi began to twist Ben Solo's heart, who still saw the mysterious figure as a mentor and sought him out immediately after destroying Luke's training temple. Who are Snoke's purple-robed attendants? They were navigators known especially for their skills charting the unknown regions where the First Order originated in the decades after the fall of the Galactic Empire. During the time of the Clone Wars, they could be seen in the service of several factions that lived in the unknown regions, including the Grisk, brutal invaders and rivals to the Chiss Ascendancy. The members of the Empire that fled into the unknown regions after the Battle of Jakku only survived thanks to hyperspace paths created by the attendants.
I know this place.
What is the Jedi Library Tree? It was a Uneti tree, a very rare kind of tree that was strong in the Force, at least for a tree. If you've seen the Clone Wars series, you've actually seen a Uneti tree before, standing in the courtyard of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. That tree was sadly uprooted after the rise of the Empire, but two pieces of it were preserved in an Imperial vault. After the Battle of Endor, Luke recovered both and gave one of the pieces to Poe Dameron's mother, who planted it near her home on Yavin 4. The staff of Chirrut Imwe in Rogue One was also made out of Uneti wood. The trees supposedly originated on Ahch-To, and Luke Skywalker's study of their saplings helped him find the first Jedi Temple along with the star compass he recovered on Pilio.
The original Jedi texts.
What do we know about the sacred Jedi texts? Not a whole lot, but we do know that Luke collected them during his travels after Return of the Jedi and eventually brought them to Ahch-To. The 2 volumes of the Aeonomica contained handwritten notes and letters about some of the earliest explorations of the Force. The Chronicles of Brusbu wound up containing information on healing kyber crystals, which Rey would use to repair the broken Skywalker lightsaber. The Ramagon contained several conflicting mythological origin stories of the Jedi Order and was discovered by Luke in ruins on Ossus, where he started his own Jedi Academy. And we know one of the other titles was Poetics of a Jedi. What is the significance of Leia's ring? Ready to be sad? It's Han and Leia's wedding ring. In the book The Princess and the Scoundrel, we see the Ewoks create simple but beautiful rings out of vines and gold amber for each of them to wear, but they were fragile and they break during the adventure in that story. So Han designed a more permanent ring. The gold was a reminder of their original rings, and the 2 stones were meant to symbolize the 2 of them. I love that even though Han and Leia separate after their sons fall to the dark side, Leia never removes the ring. There was a distance between them, but they never fell out of love.
They've tracked us through lightspeed.
How does hyperspace tracking work? We know the Galactic Empire began research on the technology thanks to Jyn Erso's line in Rogue One while she was reading out a list of their secret projects. According to the Last Jedi Visual Dictionary, the Supremacy doesn't track the Resistance fleet the same way a homing beacon would. Instead, it's basically a probability calculator. A huge array of databanks and computers on the Mega-class Star Destroyer was able to calculate a target's trajectory and all possible destinations within a matter of minutes. The ship would then jump to what the computer claimed was the most likely result, so it doesn't sound like a completely foolproof system, but it was a reliable one. How does Leia survive in the vacuum of space? First and foremost, we have to understand that Star Wars has never fully operated under real-world physics. I would consider being sucked into the vacuum of space fatal in Star Wars, but I'm also willing to give it some leeway. Other Star Wars stories, especially in Legends, have shown us Force users creating protective barriers around themselves that could aid in her survival. Even if she didn't specifically know how to use them, we've seen several canon stories like Leia, Princess of Alderaan, or Bloodline, where Leia accesses the Force in a fight-or-flight scenario. And we now know that she did train with Luke for a time. But mostly, I think it comes down to the vacuum of space being just a little bit less lethal in Star Wars. We've seen plenty of other examples of characters taking spacewalks and surviving, or simply wearing helmets in environments that probably should have killed them.
Well, keep up the barrage.
How does the Raddus outpace the Supremacy? While Star Wars often asks us to suspend our sense of disbelief when it comes to real science, the Raddus fleeing the First Order actually does work with real-world physics. Since the Resistance ships are much smaller than the First Order Star Destroyers, they are able to accelerate faster. While they have fuel, they are able to increase the distance between them and their enemies. Of course, once they run out of fuel, their acceleration stops, and the First Order is able to catch up, picking off one ship at a time. But objects with smaller mass can accelerate faster than objects with a larger mass, so the Resistance ships can get out of immediate danger, they just can't fully escape. Did Chewbacca eat that porg? We don't know for sure. There aren't any sources I could find that confirmed whether or not he went through with his dinner, but I assume that he did. He just felt a little guilty about it. He had already cooked 2 porgs. To me, it would have been more disrespectful to not eat them. Wookiees are known for being in tune with nature, even the ones that aren't classically Force-sensitive. To them, hunting to survive is a part of the circle of life. So I think Chewie likely ate the 2 porgs he cooked, was grateful for the nourishment they provided, and then probably felt too guilty to eat any more of them. What is the significance of Han's gold dice? They once belonged to Han's father before passing to him, and they became a good luck charm for the Scrum Rat on Corellia. Star Wars Legends established that Han eventually used them to win the Millennium Falcon from Lando. Canon reference books continued that trend, stating they were used in a variant of Sabacc called Corellian Spike. We didn't see that happen in Solo: A Star Wars Story, we only saw the very end of that game, but I think we can assume the dice were used earlier. Basically, they're just a good luck charm, but behind the scenes, they first appeared way back in A New Hope, only visible in one scene. Their legend grew in the old Marvel comics and the trading card game, so the dice gained some notoriety with diehard fans. They were originally going to be included in The Force Awakens, showing Han returning his dice to their rightful place on the Millennium Falcon, but the scene was cut. The Last Jedi made the dice a reminder of Han Solo after his death for Luke, Leia, and Kylo Ren, and then Solo: A Star Wars Story put them front and center once again.
So, what's our plan?
Why didn't Vice Admiral Holdo tell Poe the plan? I can think of some reasons for this, but I do think the entire plot on the Raddus could have been written more clearly to better serve the movie. For example, the First Order was tracking the Resistance through hyperspace, something they all believed to be impossible. It makes complete sense that they might think there was a physical tracker on one of the ships or even a spy within the Resistance. That's reason enough for Holdo to keep her plan quiet, but when the audience knows that's not the case and no other narrative reason is given, I agree that it feels frustrating to watch. That said, I do have to point out that the second Poe learns what the plan is, he is the one to blab about it on speakerphone, giving it away to DJ. So while I understand Holdo's reasoning, I do think giving her a more obviously stated reason when she first took control of the fleet would have benefited that part of the movie. What is the mosaic on the floor of the first Jedi Temple? It's meant to represent the Prime Jedi, considered to be the first Jedi to learn to use the Force around 25,000 years before the events of the Star Wars films. It's currently unknown if this is meant to be a literal depiction of the Prime Jedi. I think the Prime Jedi could wind up being a collection of people instead of just one person, and the mosaic could be metaphorical. We simply don't know enough right now, but James Mangold's planned movie about the Dawn of the Jedi seems likely to explore those ideas.
I took him and began the training temple.
Where was Luke's training temple? That was a mystery for quite a while until the novel Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. We briefly visit Luke's training academy in that story, and the planet is stated to be Ossus. Apparently, that was first established in the script notes for the Book of Boba Fett, where we see Luke constructing the first buildings for his academy, and the novel made it official. Ossus was an important planet to the Jedi in Star Wars Legends, serving as its headquarters long before they built their Jedi temple on Coruscant. In canon, it was also associated with the Jedi of old and was said to be home to a great Jedi library long ago.
He had vanished with a handful of my students.
What happened to Luke's surviving students? Skywalker says when he recovered from Ben Solo's attack, his nephew and a handful of students were missing. That led some fans to believe those students could have become the Knights of Ren, but their story is told in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic by Charles Soule. 3 Padawans were off on a mission when Ben Solo destroyed Luke's temple. Ty, Vo, and Hennix all found Ben in the aftermath and drew their lightsabers on him when he claimed responsibility for what happened. He bested them and fled, but they chased him across the galaxy. Hennix died in an accident on the planet Elphrona. Ty was killed by Ren, the leader of the Knights of Ren, shortly after, an act that sent Ben into a rage. He killed Ren and took control of the Knights, and then he killed Vo himself. When did Ben Solo fall to the dark side? That's hard to pinpoint, but we do know the destruction of Luke's temple took place 6 years before the events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. That was the final nail in the coffin. That said, Snoke had already been manipulating Ben for some unknown amount of time, and it's possible young Solo had already dabbled in dealings with the First Order. The book Bloodline, which takes place before the destruction of Luke's academy, hints that Ben Solo knew of an assassination attempt on his mother's life, and he may have secretly warned her about it. So we don't know the full timeline of his fall, but we can say that he became Kylo Ren 6 years before the sequel trilogy.
Lesson 2.
What was Luke's third lesson to Rey? You can find it in a deleted scene for the film that was ultimately cut for pacing reasons. In it, Rey sees ships approaching the Caretaker's village and Luke tells her it's violent raiders, but he urges her not to defend the Caretakers and escalate the fighting because that's what the sacred Jedi texts claim a Jedi would do. Really, he's testing her character to see if she would take action. She does and runs off to save the Caretakers, finding them in the midst of a party instead. The ships were simply other members of the village returning from a fishing trip. Later, Luke tells Rey what the galaxy needs is her willingness to act regardless of the teachings of the Jedi. The lesson here isn't as straightforward as the other two, but I think Luke is saying that the dogma of the Jedi could sometimes get in the way of doing what's right. I would agree, we saw that happen in the prequel trilogy, but that doesn't mean the Jedi need to end, it simply means their teachings can and should be updated. Any institution should be willing to adapt to changing times, cultures, and beliefs.
Don't let the rapper fool you, friend.
Why was DJ in jail in The Last Jedi? That story is told in the one-shot DJ Most Wanted comic that came out around the same time as the movie. Basically, he was running a bunch of scams in the city under the alias Denel Stench. He had stolen some currency from a bunch of shady characters and then installed some sort of virus on it. He then purposefully lost it all in the casinos, and then the infected credits would pass the virus around, which would eventually give him a big payout. But all the people he scammed started looking for Denel Stench. The walls started closing in around DJ, and he basically got himself arrested so he wouldn't get killed, and prepared to leave Canto Bight as quickly as he could. How does Rey know how to swim? Okay, first of all, as Harrison Ford put it to Mark Hamill almost 50 years ago,
It ain't that kind of movie.
the scenes in the Mirror Cave are all about myth and symbolism. Rey's plunge into the water is more about a metaphorical baptism and coming change, reinforced by her hair changing as well. But she grew up surrounded by sand. How does she know how to swim? Who cares? It doesn't matter. But with that out of the way, I do have some in-universe answers. First, I don't think she does know how to swim. Not very well anyway. She falls in the water, flails about, is able to make it to the surface, and to me, it looks like she ineffectively splashes her way to the shore. Second, Rey wasn't born on Jakku. According to the novel Shadow of the Sith, she was born on the forest planet Hypercarn. It's completely reasonable that as a young child, she could have learned to swim at least well enough to not drown. What does the vision in the Mirror Cave mean? Just like Luke's vision in the Darkside Cave on Dagobah, I think this is fully up to the interpretation of the viewer. I think this Darkside Cave wanted to make Rey feel alone and wanted to drive her closer to Kylo Ren and eventually Snoke, but it did so by telling her the truth. The long line of Reys could represent every version of herself she could become, the infinite possibilities of the future. She goes deeper to try to see where the line ends, what her future could be, and she once again seeks identity through her parents, begging to see them. She sees two figures that become one, and it's revealed to simply be her. As Kylo Ren tells her, she looks for father figures in Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. She keeps looking to other people, maybe wanting them to just tell her what to do and what is right. But the mirror is saying, no, you have to decide who you are for yourself. You never had parents to guide you before, and you don't need them now. From one point of view, I think that's an empowering message, but from Rey's point of view, it compounds the loneliness she has always felt and was feeling intensely on Ahch-To. That's what I get from the scene, but I'd love to hear your own interpretations in the comments. How could the same person who saw good in Darth Vader ignite his lightsaber against his nephew? Yes, it's true that in Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker told Obi-Wan Kenobi that he couldn't kill his own father, and he continued to refuse to fight Anakin Skywalker. But those scenes in the Emperor's throne room show Luke bouncing back and forth between violence and peace, until Vader threatens someone Luke loves, Leia. Then Luke loses his mind and just starts wailing on his own father and very nearly does kill him. We can follow that same line of thinking in The Last Jedi. Luke saw a possible future in Ben's mind: pain, destruction, death, and the end of everything Luke loved. We've also seen that visions in the Force can appear to be very real, so in a single second of a shameful act, he ignited his lightsaber, in a moment that is directly mirroring the same shot where Luke almost killed Vader. This is one of Luke's biggest flaws. We see it in The Empire Strikes Back as well, sensing danger for his friends and running off to face it before he's ready. We also see that he repeats another mistake from Dagobah. What's in the Darkside Cave? Only what you take with you. If you're bringing your weapons into the cave, you're basically looking for something to fight. Why did Luke even bring his lightsaber into Ben's hut? He wasn't planning to draw it on his nephew, but bringing a lightsaber along to me says subconsciously Luke's mind was made up. He already thought Ben was dangerous. Why did Ben Solo have a calligraphy set? It's visible in a blink and you'll miss it moment, but the Last Jedi Visual Dictionary makes specific mention of the set, and the reference book 100 Objects by Kristen Baver builds on it. The set once belonged to Obi-Wan Kenobi, was recovered from his hut by Luke, and given to Ben Solo as a gift. The reason it's important is because of the book Bloodline by Claudia Gray. Rian Johnson gave some creative insight to the author, since the book connected to The Last Jedi. That story is about Leia's final days in the New Republic Senate, about 6 years before the sequel trilogy. In it, she is warned of an assassination attempt thanks to a handwritten note, a rare sight in the Star Wars galaxy. Although it is not confirmed, I think it's likely her son knew of the plot and discreetly saved his mother's life.
Someone needs to stay behind and pilot the cruiser.
When did Leia Organa meet Amilyn Holdo? It's clear they have a history together, even if we don't see it in The Last Jedi. They met in the book Leia, Princess of Alderaan by Claudia Gray, which takes place when Leia is 16 years old, first entering the Imperial Apprentice Legislature to train to enter the Galactic Senate. Amilyn was another member of the program, known for her rebellious streak. The two young women developed a friendship that continued for years. Before the Battle of Yavin, they were companions on Coruscant, but as war with the Empire loomed closer, Holdo joined Leia in the rebellion, becoming a spy for the Alliance.
Fire on that cruiser!
Why wasn't the Holdo maneuver used more frequently? The Last Jedi novelization by Jason Fry goes into a lot of details about how the Raddus's experimental shields were actually responsible for most of the damage from the Holdo maneuver in The Last Jedi. I also don't think she necessarily knew what would happen when she entered hyperspace. I think she was acting out of desperation to save the rest of the Resistance. As Finn says later in The Rise of Skywalker, it was a 1 in a million shot. It's not a strategy that can be dependably relied upon because there's no guarantee it'll work. I think it's silly to say that and then show it happening later in the exact same movie, but that's a topic for another time. Despite it being established as a near impossible maneuver to replicate, fans have wondered why we haven't seen it happen before. But we have. In the Star Wars Legends comic Dark Empire 2, the resurrected Emperor uses a superweapon called the Galaxy Gun that weaponized hyperspace to a degree, and he said, "Marvelous, it's a wonder we didn't think of it decades ago." I know the Galaxy Gun didn't work exactly like a bunch of Holdo maneuvers, but my point is that someone had to be the first to successfully do something like this. Maybe it had been attempted before and failed, but now people can study what Holdo did and crack the case. The fact of the matter is, we know very little about how hyperspace even works. I assume there is a reason people don't go around ramming things at light speed willy-nilly, even if I don't know what that specific reason is.
The mineral planet Crate, an uncharted hideout from the days of the Rebellion.
What was the Rebellion's history on Crate? It was used as a base before the Rebel Alliance was even officially formed. 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, when Leia Organa was 16, she investigated Rebel activity and tracked it back to Crate, where she was surprised to find her father in charge, which sparked her own involvement with the Rebellion. The base there was abandoned shortly after, but was revisited by Leia when the Rebel Alliance needed a new secret base. Despite their victory in the Battle of Yavin, the Rebels had to flee Yavin 4, and Crate was floated as a possible new home. They went so far as to begin digging trenches and establishing defenses, but their location was betrayed by a miner on the planet, and the Empire sent the Rebel Alliance on the run once more. The Resistance would later return to those defenses over 3 decades later.
What happened?
How did Rey get back to the Millennium Falcon? As Hux tells Kylo Ren, she got away in Snoke's personal escape craft that must have been located nearby the throne room. She then waited in space for Chewbacca to pick her up in the Millennium Falcon. But the Last Jedi novelization also tells us that she had a moment where she considered killing an unconscious Kylo Ren. Obviously, she rejects that idea, even though she knows one quick yet dark act had the potential to save countless lives. But she knew the Force wasn't finished with him, and of course he wound up playing a role in the fight against Palpatine a year later. What happened to all the Porgs on the Millennium Falcon? Don't worry, they're all fine, and we know that thanks to the book Pirate's Price, the Star Wars Adventures comics, Galaxy's Edge, and Tales from the Galaxy's Edge. Basically, when the Resistance set up a base on Batuu and the Millennium Falcon was parked in Black Spire Outpost, all the Porg stowaways began to thrive on the new world. 2 of them became companions of the pirate Hondo Ohnaka, who named them Puffy and Snappy. The Porgs on Batuu reproduced and began living in the cliffs of the planet, which were somewhat similar to their natural habitat on Ahch-To. Some were domesticated and sold as pets in the market, and a drink was named after the critters in Oga's Cantina.
Our distress signal's been received at multiple points, but no response.
Why didn't any Resistance allies answer the call to help at the Battle of Crate? The Rise of Skywalker novelization explains that it wasn't simply a matter of losing hope, as Leia fears in The Last Jedi. On Kijimi, Poe confides in Zori Bliss that he's afraid no one even heard their message. One of the First Order's priorities after the destruction of the New Republic Senate was shutting down communications, especially to planets friendly to the Resistance. Poe knows for a fact that the First Order had been jamming their transmissions, but he did also fear that the galaxy had truly given up hope. Why didn't Luke use his green lightsaber in his Force projection? Rian Johnson says it was to get a rise out of Kylo Ren since he felt that the blue lightsaber belonged to him. It was also a signal that something wasn't quite right with Luke's appearance on Crate. But I'm also going to add my own reasoning to this. So much of the Force is about visualization and belief. Yoda says as much in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke is trying to manifest himself as the vision of an absolute Jedi hero, but the green lightsaber is a symbol of one of his most shameful moments. moments, igniting it in his nephew's hut. Even though using the green lightsaber would have made more sense, considering we didn't just see it break in half, I suspect Luke may not have been able to make a convincing projection if he himself didn't fully believe it. We also don't know exactly how this works. He may not have chosen all the specific details of his projection's appearance. It could just be happening based on his own thoughts and feelings. My point is, I think when Luke envisions the most heroic version of himself, it probably doesn't include the green lightsaber that helped create Kylo Ren.
See you around, kid.
Why did Luke's Force projection cause his death? Force projection, also known as doppelganger or simulfuturist, first appeared in Star Wars Legends and was expanded upon by Force users called the Falanasi. They were known for first achieving Force projection, which required the user to pour their life essence into the cosmic Force, which is the aspect of the Force which makes Force ghosts possible. In a sense, creating a Force projection was very similar to the way a Jedi who had become one with the Force would be able to create a physical manifestation of their consciousness. Creating a projection would not result in death for any user, but the further the distance, the more realistic the doppelganger, and the longer it was projected all factored into the difficulty of the technique, and therefore how much of a being's life essence would be given up to the cosmic Force itself. Why does Luke's robotic hand become one with the Force? It was cybernetic, so why does it disappear with the rest of his body? It disappears for the same reason most of Obi-Wan's robes disappear when he becomes one with the Force. That hand was a part of Luke, cybernetic or not. He could and did use the Force with it. Luke had to accept the new hand as part of himself. I see no reason why it would have to be left behind. But ultimately, this all came down to a filmmaking decision. On Twitter, Rian Johnson said, "In the edit room, someone joke suggested that when he fades away, his robot hand should clank down onto the rock, but it might have undercut the moment." What happened to Luke's green lightsaber? According to the novelization of The Last Jedi by Jason Fry, Luke brought the weapon to Ahch-To all those years ago. We don't know where he kept it, but the caretakers of the island cleaned out his hut after he became one with the Force. They packed up his robes, various artifacts, and the book specifies they also collected his weapon, taking them all to a repository where other such items were held from the various Jedi that lived on or visited the first Jedi Temple over the course of tens of thousands of years. So Luke's green lightsaber is still on Ahch-To somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Luke Skywalker. How does Luke's story spread across the galaxy? I'm speculating here, but I think the answer can be found in the Poe Dameron comics by Charles Soule. Leading up to the events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, Poe was approached by an old friend from the New Republic Navy named Suralinda Javos. She had left the military to become a journalist and attempted to learn the location of the Resistance base. But the closer she got to the Resistance, the more she began to believe in their cause, and she eventually joined Black Squadron. She was with the rest of the pilots during the events of The Last Jedi, failing to gather allies for the Resistance. After learning about the Battle of Crait, I believe she could have used her contacts as a journalist to help spread the legend of Luke Skywalker, which is something the book Resistance Reborn hints at as a possibility.
Happy beats here, buddy, come on.
Who says, "I've got a bad feeling about this" in The Last Jedi? It's a line that's appeared in every Star Wars movie in some form or fashion, and yes, I include Han Solo saying he has a good feeling about this in Solo: A Star Wars Story. But where is it in The Last Jedi? It's one of the very first lines in the movie. It just wasn't delivered in basic. It was delivered in binary by BB-8, and I love that. You can still understand the line given the context of the scene, but it isn't an overt inclusion forced into the script because it's supposed to be there. Now let's move on to the Rise of Skywalker. What was Palpatine's mysterious broadcast? There was an event in Fortnite of all places where you could actually hear the Emperor's message. Over the HoloNet, he said, "At last the work of generations is complete. The great error is corrected. The day of victory is at hand. The day of revenge. The day of the Sith." That's a strange place to put a very important message, but it was also included in the Rise of Skywalker novelization written by Ray Carson. Why does Mustafar look different at the start of the film? Since when did it have trees? In the Vader Immortal VR game, we learn that thousands of years before the events of the Skywalker saga, the planet was covered in plant life. The leader of Mustafar was a Force user named Lady Corvax. When her husband was killed in battle, she became obsessed with finding a way to bring him back to life. That led her to steal a sacred Mustafarian relic called the Bright Star. She installed it into a machine she created, which she believed would resurrect her husband. Instead, the misuse of the relic transformed Mustafar into the lava-covered hellscape we're used to seeing. Vader Immortal is about Darth Vader attempting to recover the Bright Star to resurrect Padme, but he is stopped by a smuggler and what remains of Lord Corvax's spirit. They destroy the Bright Star, and the energy that's released begins to heal the planet. 3 decades later, it would appear that the healing process has begun. The iron trees that we see on Mustafar are growing in a place called Corvax Finn. Who is Kylo Ren fighting on Mustafar? They were Sith cultists called the Elasmic of Winsit. They settled on Mustafar sometime after Darth Vader's death and began to protect the lands near the ruins of the Sith Lord's castle. They planted the iron trees now seen on the planet, hoping to jumpstart Mustafar's regrowth. The Elasmic were loyal to the Sith over Supreme Leader Kylo Ren and hoped to stop him from reaching Darth Vader's Wayfinder and therefore the hidden world Exegol. What was the Eye of Webbish Bog? Deleted scenes from The Rise of Skywalker would have shown Kylo Ren encountering a creepy, spider-like creature attached to the head of a giant on Mustafar. Its connection to the Force allowed it to foresee the future and act as a kind of oracle. The Darth Vader comics show us that it originally gave the Sith Wayfinder to Vader shortly after the events of The Empire Strikes Back. Eventually, the Sith Lord returned his Wayfinder to Mustafar and tasked the Eye with its protection. The Rise of Skywalker novelization includes the deleted scene between Kylo and the Eye. In it, the Eye of Webbish Bog warns Kylo that by continuing down this path, he will eventually confront his true self, and then offers up the location of the Wayfinder within the stone altar we see in the film.
What could you give me?
When was the Sith Eternal Fleet built? We don't know exactly when the fleet began construction, but it must have been well before the events of The Empire Strikes Back. Shortly after the Battle of Hoth, Darth Vader made his way to Exegol for the first time, where he discovered an already significant fleet of Star Destroyers. Since the Zeiston-class Star Destroyers were based on the Imperial One-class design, I would guess Palpatine ordered the construction to begin while that ship was still being produced, prior to the year 9 BBY. But the planet-killing super lasers couldn't have been added until sometime after the Battle of Yavin, once the technology had been figured out by Galen Erso. Exegol was home to a massive red kyber crystal that was used to power the super lasers. I'm guessing, but the fleet may have been built over the course of 4 decades, alongside the development of the Death Stars and Starkiller Base.
Claude, I hope you fixed that surge.
What's the deal with Claude? Creature designer Neil Scanlon described scenes that were filmed but not used in the final cut of The Rise of Skywalker that would have given us more context, stating Claude's backstory as it was told to us was that he was hanging around at a galactic bus stop when the Millennium Falcon flew by, and Claude got on board because Finn mistakes him for someone else. So Claude never really knew why he was there, and that joke was actually filmed. I imagine he was meant to have like a little mini arc as someone who accidentally joined the Resistance and at first wants nothing to do with them, but then winds up believing in their cause. But that was all dropped, so instead he's just some guy we see hanging around in a couple of scenes. We probably won't get his full story until the year 2059 when The Rise of Skywalker from a Certain Point of View comes out.
What are you doing? Lightspeed skipping!
What is lightspeed skipping? We see the first time Poe Dameron lightspeed skips in the book Freefall. As part of the Spice Runners of Kijimi, Poe's team's ship is tracked by some rivals who are hot on their tail. To escape, they skip through hyperspace to buy enough time to find and disable the homing beacon that had been planted on their ship. The technique was described as jumping along a series of preset coordinates that would appear random, but were actually dangerous locations known to Poe's crew. Places with lots of obstructions that would slow down or destroy their enemies. Even though they weren't random jumps, lightspeed skipping was a move of desperation that would put a dangerous amount of strain on any ship that tried it.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
How did Palpatine return? The answer to that question can be found in the Rise of Skywalker novelization and the Bad Batch animated series. The Emperor basically survived the same way he did in Star Wars Legends. As he fell down the second Death Star's reactor shaft, he transferred his consciousness to a prepared clone body. Unfortunately for him, the cloned vessel wasn't strong enough to contain his spirit, and it began to quickly decay. The Empire began to unlock the secrets to creating clones with strong metachlorian counts immediately after the end of the Clone Wars in a secret installation called Mount Tantus. Project Necromancer involved the blood of a young clone named Omega who was held in their facility, but her brothers, a group of enhanced clones called the Bad Batch, rescued her and inadvertently ruined Palpatine's plans. The Empire had to start from scratch without Omega's blood, and their research wasn't completed in time for the Emperor's near-death at the Battle of Endor.
Cloning. Secrets only the Sith knew.
Who is Beaumont Kin? He was a historian that joined the Resistance after the destruction of Hosnian Prime. He was very interested in the ancient Sith and visited several worlds important to their order like Malachor and Moraband. He earned a doctorate from the Lurkt Historical Institute on Hosnian Prime and was given funding to archaeological expeditions on the planet Yoturba. He happened to discover a Sith holocron there while he was being visited by Luke Skywalker and Lor San Tekka. Over a decade later, the First Order attacked. The destruction of the New Republic Senate prompted him to join the Resistance, and he survived through the Battle of Exegol. When the fighting was over, he wrote a book about the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire in the hopes that future generations could prevent the return of another Imperial regime. Why did Kylo Ren reforge his helmet? In-universe, I think it all comes down to his mission to find Rey. He had called the Knights of Ren together, and his helmet was a symbol of leadership to them. But since his path was now headed directly for Rey, a woman he absolutely had feelings for, the mask would be able to hide his face and true feelings from her. Out of universe, I think the return of the mask was an easy way to get around a script that, by many accounts, was being rewritten frequently. Kylo delivers several key lines while wearing the mask, and if any of those plot points were to change, they could be more easily re-recorded as a voiceover instead of a full reshoot.
Knights of Ren. Cool.
Who were the Knights of Ren? They were darkside users originally from the unknown regions who called the Force the Shadow. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, they were led by a man simply known as Ren, but the Knights existed long before he was born. It would seem that they used to have a reputation as a more powerful group, but by the time we meet them, their connection to the Force was considered weak when compared to a Jedi or Sith. Ben Solo briefly met them when he was still training with Luke Skywalker, and sought them out after he destroyed his uncle's Jedi Academy. He was told that joining the Knights of Ren required what they referred to as a good death, the sacrifice of a family member or a kill to prove one's strength. Ben Solo wound up killing Ren in front of the other Knights, making him their new leader.
They conjured legions of Star Destroyers.
Who was Allegiant General Pryde? His backstory has been told in several stories by now, including the Darth Vader comics, Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View, and Shadow of the Sith. As part of the Empire, he was captured by a squad of cybernetically enhanced rebels, but was freed shortly after by Darth Vader. Pryde witnessed the Sith Lord's power and became obsessed with his strength, helping him fight against a splinter group of the Empire called the Schism Imperial. He was present for the battles of Endor and Jakku, and fled into the unknown regions after the New Republic's victory. 16 years later, he worked alongside the Corporate Sector Authority as a colonel in the Imperial Remnant. He learned of the Sith Eternal at this time when he helped Ochi of Bestoon hunt down a young Rey and her parents. He encountered the First Order and joined their ranks in the following years, but his true loyalty remained to the Sith Eternal.
Wookiees stand out in a crowd.
What is Lando doing on Pisana? The answer can be found in the novel Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. We learn that Lando's young daughter was kidnapped by the First Order when she was only 2 years old, which was a dropped subplot from Episode 9. Years later, Lando gets a lead on the people that took her in the form of Ochi of Bestoon. He recruits Luke to chase him across the galaxy, but as he says in the movie, the trail went cold on Pisana. Heartbroken and discouraged, Lando decided to stay on the planet and continue looking for clues. There he remained for 14 years until Rey, Finn, and Poe arrived.
They fly now! They fly now!
Why are Finn and Poe so surprised to see flying stormtroopers? Certainly a former stormtrooper would have known that they could fly, and we know Poe Dameron has encountered them before in the comics. First, I want to admit that I do think this moment was written for most of the Star Wars audience who don't read the comics or watch the animated series. For most people watching the movie, they might be having the same reaction seeing a stormtrooper fly for the first time on the big screen. But for all of us nerds, I don't see why we can't just chalk it up to Finn and Poe's exasperation. They're being chased by stormtroopers and all of a sudden they launch up into the air and they're like, ugh, not only do these stormtroopers have tread speeders, but they also have jump troopers? People made way too big of a deal out of that small moment, in my opinion.
Rey! Rey, I never told you Rey!
What was Finn going to say to Rey? He was going to tell her that he was able to feel the Force. While the movie doesn't answer this directly, Finn's growing strength can be seen during the Battle of Exegol when he is able to lead the Resistance attack to the Star Destroyer Steadfast, and when he feels Rey's temporary death. 2 LEGO shorts have continued his story a bit, showing him training under Rey and encountering the Force ghost of Obi-Wan, who straight up calls Finn a Jedi. This is a plotline I really hope is continued in the new Jedi Order movie, jumping 15 years into the future to show Finn as a full Jedi Knight or Master.
Horrible things have happened with this.
Does Rey know psychometry? I think the simple answer is yes, and it's been confirmed in reference books. Psychometry, or the ability to feel an object's history through the Force, was said to be rare, but Star Wars has been using it as a storytelling device more frequently. Ahsoka Tano and Vernestra Rwoh were both shown using it to investigate crime scenes. It might be more accurate to say that it's rare for a Jedi to be naturally gifted with psychometry. Quinlan Vos or Cal Kestis seem like they grew up understanding the ability, but it makes sense to me that any Jedi would be able to learn it, especially someone long-lived like Vernestra. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Yoda could use psychometry. But in Rey's case, I think experiencing the memories of the dagger is more personal. It's the blade that killed her parents. It unlocks memories that are specific to her. Or when she touches the Skywalker lightsaber in The Force Awakens, I think the Force is trying to show her something. So while I do think Rey understands and can use psychometry, the examples we see in the movies seem like she's getting a little boost from the cosmic force.
Ochi of Bestoon.
Who was Ochi of Bestoon? He was an assassin and Jedi hunter that was active at least by the time of the Clone Wars. At some point, he attempted to kill Jedi Master Depa Billaba, but he was thwarted by Mace Windu. Over 2 decades later, he was hired by Emperor Palpatine to hunt down and kill a wounded Darth Vader. Obviously, the Sith apprentice survived the encounter and made Ochi subservient to him. After retrieving a Wayfinder, Vader forced Ochi to join him on a mission to Exegol, where they found the Emperor guarding a massive red kyber crystal. Palpatine hurt the crystal through the Force, and it gave off a powerful light that burned out Ochi's eyes, blinding him. The assassin constantly shifted his loyalties, working for Vader, Lady Kira of Crimson Dawn, and even the former handmaidens of Padme Amidala, but he always returned to serve the Sith. Years after the supposed death of Palpatine, a Sith cultist revealed that the Emperor lived and hired Ochi to find his granddaughter Rey and bring her to Exegol. As we see in the movie, the assassin would fail and die on this final mission.
You were a spice runner? You were a stormtrooper?
Were you a spice runner?
When was Poe Dameron a spice runner? Zori Bliss makes it sound like Poe was part of her crew right before he joined the Resistance, but the book Freefall by Alex Segura clears up the timeline. When Poe was 16 years old, he ran away from home and fell in with the Spice Runners of Kijimi for about a year. He developed a relationship with Zori, but eventually realized that he couldn't go on living life as a criminal. He betrayed the Spice Runners and even Zori, who wanted to run away with him. That all took place about 17 years before the events of the Rise of Skywalker. 8 years later, when Poe was about 25, he joined the New Republic Navy, and 4 years after that, he joined the Resistance. The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary says Poe spent 5 years as a Spice Runner, but I would go with the novel's timeline of 1 year over the reference book. Is that Dengar in the bar on Kijimi? The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary names that character Hrothgar Deng and states that he was an old and experienced Corellian bounty hunter operating under an alias. He subjected himself to cybernetic replacements in a poorly planned bid to live and work forever. Deng's armor and history as a Corellian bounty hunter link him to Dengar, one of the bounty hunters from The Empire Strikes Back. The Star Wars book states that Dengar became unrecognizable after undergoing extreme surgeries. Another reference book said there was an in-universe rumor that linked the two characters, and Star Wars Adventures issue 14 had a character use Dengar and Hrothgar's names interchangeably. I think it's very likely that Dengar and Hrothgar Deng are the same person.
Don't mind us.
Who was John Williams' cameo character in The Rise of Skywalker? Oma Trace was the bartender working in the Spice Runners' den on Kijimi. According to Williams, he at first turned down the chance to appear, just like George Lucas did in Revenge of the Sith. But once again, a family member convinced him to have some fun. This time it was John's wife, Samantha. On the shelves behind Oma Trace are 51 props that were created to represent the many films he has scored during his career, including barrels from Jaws, a whip from Indiana Jones, an iron from Home Alone, and so on. The character's name, Oma Trace, is an anagram of the word maestro.
You'll be safe here. I promise.
Who were Rey's parents? Their story was told in the novel Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. Her father, Dathan, was created on Exegol about 12 years before the Battle of Yavin. He was a failed clone of the Emperor, a strand cast meant to contain Palpatine's spirit in the event of his death. But Dathan had no connection to the Force and was considered to be an abomination. When he was about 16, he escaped, or was allowed to escape Exegol, and he set off to create a life of his own. He traveled for 11 years until he met a woman named Miramir on the planet Hypercarn. They fell in love, got married, and had a daughter they named Rey. Hoping to hide from the Sith, they moved to Jakku, where they worked as junk traders for 5 years until Ochi of Bestoon picked up their trail. They temporarily hid Rey with Unkar Plutt, hoping to lure Ochi to another desert world, Pisana, before returning for their daughter, but they were caught and killed, and Ochi perished on Pisana, so Rey was left on Jakku to survive on her own.
What Palpatine doesn't know is we're a dyad in the Force.
What is a dyad in the Force? It was a bond in the Force between two beings that was so strong they were basically one. The two halves of a dyad were able to communicate mentally and physically across great distances. They could even pass objects between one another. The ability to use the Force to heal came naturally to them, and as illustrated by Ben Solo, one half of a dyad could give up their life energy to resurrect the other. The power of their bond could also heal others. Dyads were so rare that they were considered mysterious even to those most knowledgeable in the Force. The Sith's rule of two was supposedly an attempt to manufacture a dyad. The truth is, we don't know much about dyads right now.
The Wayfinder's there.
How did Ochi's knife point the way to the Emperor's vault? The answer is in the novel Shadow of the Sith. Ochi of Bestoon was given the dagger by a Sith cultist who was instructed to find Rey and bring her to Exegol. While Ochi had been to Exegol before, as seen in the Darth Vader comics, he didn't know how to get there on his own. He asked for a wayfinder, and the cultist told him the blade would point the way when the time was right. Over the course of the story, Ochi realized that the dagger would absorb the blood of anyone he killed with it, glowing red and revealing hidden Sith writing, kind of like the One Ring when it was exposed to fire, except this time the writing didn't fade away. So the blade was designed to point the way to Exegol, and the clues would only be revealed through blood and death. Some of the Star Wars comics show that Ochi had a nearly identical dagger years prior during the Galactic Civil War. I guess we should assume that the two daggers are modeled after one another, but are different. Or maybe Ochi lost that dagger, the Sith enchanted it, and then returned it.
You were First Order?
Not by choice.
How were stormtroopers conscripted into the First Order? They were kidnapped and brainwashed as very young children as part of an initiative called Project Harvester. It was created by Brendel Hux, the father of Armitage, as a combination of clone and stormtrooper philosophies, indoctrinating their soldiers almost from birth. Finn, Janna, Lando's daughter Kadara, and countless other children were taken from their families. The children of rebel heroes were targeted, discouraging their parents from fighting the First Order when theoretically any stormtrooper could be their own child.
Leia knows what must be done, Atu.
What exactly did Leia do to reach Kylo Ren? The Rise of Skywalker novelization gives us some more details. Luke spoke to her through the Force and told her what was going on, encouraging her to tell her son that she would always love him, even if he never returned to the light side. She basically did a similar thing as Luke, projecting himself on Crate, sending her love across the galaxy to her son. The book tells us that she was forever weakened by her near-death experience in The Last Jedi, and so the act took all the strength she had left.
You're just a memory.
Your memory.
Was Han Solo a Force ghost? No. As Ben Solo states in the movie itself, he was only experiencing a memory. The entire conversation was in his head, replaying his final moments with his father, except this time he makes the right choice and leaves Kylo Ren behind forever. So in the literal, in-universe sense, Han Solo was not a Force ghost. He did not become one with the Force, he wasn't Force sensitive, it doesn't make sense for him to be a Force ghost. But symbolically, I think what it means to become a Force ghost is that you live on through your relationships and the legacy you leave behind. So even though Ben Solo was not having a conversation with the specter of his father, he was still affected by his father's final words and actions. So even if Han Solo didn't have the power to become a Force ghost, his memory still accomplished the same thing a ghost could have.
Kijimi is in range.
Fire.
Where did Final Order soldiers come from? They were born and raised entirely on Exegol. Even during the reign of the Empire, Palpatine had his most loyal servants hidden away on the Sith world, working to create the Final Order fleet as well as the technology to help him live forever. Sith troopers and the officers who commanded the fleet of Star Destroyers were all the offspring of the Sith Eternal, raised to be completely loyal to their Sith ruler, Darth Sidious.
Because you're a Palpatine.
How did Luke and Leia know Rey was a Palpatine? We don't know the answer to this question yet, but what makes the most sense to me is that Luke found out after he became one with the Force. Joining the Cosmic Force means Luke existed outside of space and time and would be able to conceivably learn anything and everything he would ever want. It would have then been simple enough to communicate with Leia and tell her all about Rey's lineage, but I doubt either of the Skywalker twins cared at all. It's also possible that Luke may have been able to put some pieces together thanks to the events of the novel Shadow of the Sith. In it, Luke and Lando search for clues to Exegol by attempting to help Rey's parents. They have no idea who those people truly are, and they don't actually meet them or Rey, but it could have been a starting point for Luke to start having some suspicions, and then have them confirmed once he became one with the Force.
It was the last night of her training.
When did Leia train to be a Jedi? The best piece of data we have comes from the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary, which says Leia trained with Luke after getting married to Han and before the birth of Ben Solo. Ben was born 1 year after the Battle of Endor, so she only trained with Luke for a matter of months. But Leia also seemed to be busy starting the New Republic and fighting what remained of the Empire. That was a busy time for her even without Jedi training. On one hand, Star Wars does tend to cram several events into small amounts of time, but on the other hand, I won't be surprised if some future story changes the timeline of the Visual Dictionary, perhaps giving her a little more time with Luke, maybe after the birth of her son. How does Ben Solo reach Exegol? Didn't Rey steal his TIE Whisper? We can see that he apparently landed a TIE fighter on the planet next to Luke's old X-Wing, which he took out of the ruins of the Death Star. But those ships don't have hyperdrive, so what's going on? The novelization for The Rise of Skywalker fixed this issue by stating that Ben didn't take a standard TIE fighter from an old ruined hangar, but instead found a TIE Scout. That ship was first created for Timothy Zahn's novel Heir to the Empire way back in 1991, and it was pretty much just a TIE fighter with a hyperdrive. Why do the Knights of Ren turn on Ben Solo? It's because the Knights of Ren were never truly loyal to Kylo. They served him as long as he was serving their true master, Palpatine. About 25 years before Kylo Ren took control of the Knights, they were part of a campaign to fight against the Sith. They were recruited by Kira and Crimson Dawn to defeat Darth Vader and Darth Sidious. The Knights joined the fight, fearing that the Sith would eventually see them as dark-side rivals to be destroyed. But their leader at the time, Ren, decided there was no defeating the Emperor and betrayed Kira, hoping to become allies of the Sith instead. Palpatine killed some of the Knights for their actions, but allowed the survivors to serve him from that point forward. So the Knights of Ren were always working for Palpatine first and foremost. Even their loyalty to Kylo Ren was at the wishes of the resurrected Emperor.
You will be Empress.
Did Palpatine want Rey to rule, or did he want her dead? The movie leaves this fairly ambiguous, but here is my interpretation. Palpatine was never gonna let Rey rule the Sith. The reason Rey's father was even created was because Palpatine needed a suitable vessel for his spirit to inhabit. His faulty clone body was decaying, and he needed someone strong enough to contain his power. Rey's father wasn't strong in the Force at all, but she was. I personally believe Palpatine's spirit would have at least attempted to possess Rey's body if she had struck him down. Everything he was telling her up until that point was probably just manipulation. Again, I think this is up for some debate, but for Palpatine to step aside and to let anyone else rule in his place seems wildly out of character to me. What squadrons and ships came to the Battle of Exegol? The Rise of Skywalker novelization mentions a handful of familiar names. Phantom Squadron is the first to chime in, a group of washout pilots that was first created by Wedge Antilles shortly before the Battle of Jakku. Alphabet Squadron was there, or at least Alphabet 2. That squadron was an intelligence unit that was also created before the Battle of Jakku, made up of an X-Wing, a Y-Wing, an A-Wing, a B-Wing, and a U-Wing. Zay Versio from Inferno Squad calls into the fight. She was the daughter of Iden Versio, a former Imperial who defected to the New Republic, you guessed it, shortly before the Battle of Jakku. Kazuda Xiono from Star Wars Resistance announces his presence, and some of the ships from that series can be seen in the movie itself. The book The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire also states that Doza joined the fight, suggesting that the Colossus might have been there. The Ghost is clearly seen in the movie, although we don't know who was piloting it. There are some Mandalorian starfighters in the fray, and countless other familiar ships, but I think these are all the individual groups and characters we know were at Exegol.
Nice flying, Lando!
Where was Wedge during the rest of the sequel trilogy? He was retired and living on the planet Akiva with Nora Wexley, the mother of Snap Wexley. They developed a relationship at the end of the Galactic Civil War and got married, making Wedge Snap's stepfather. Both war veterans, they chose to stay retired and live out the rest of their days in peace despite the creeping threat of the First Order. After the destruction of Hosnian Prime and the Battle of Crate, they got a visit from Snap, who convinced them to rejoin the fight after the loss of the New Republic and Resistance leadership. They quickly took part in a mission to Corellia to rescue Resistance members being targeted by the First Order. We don't know of any other missions Wedge took part in until the Battle of Exegol, but he likely served with them for the year in between episodes 8 and 9. Wedge heartbreakingly arrived with Lando and the Millennium Falcon mere moments after the death of his stepson. I should also point out that the real reason we didn't see Wedge until The Rise of Skywalker is because actor Dennis Lawson turned down the chance to appear in The Force Awakens, or was unable to appear due to a scheduling conflict. Lawson has given conflicting reasons in interviews.
Take a guess, Spice Runner.
How did Zori Bliss and Babu Frick get off Kijimi? More of their story was told in the Rise of Skywalker novelization. The First Order tore Kijimi apart searching for Resistance allies, specifically the Spice Runners. The gang split up, and Zori took a young girl named Aluda to where her Y-Wing was docked to escape. But it was crawling with First Order patrols, and Aluda decided to distract them so Zori could reach her ship. As a Zeiston-class Star Destroyer entered Kijimi's orbit and prepared to destroy the planet, Zori took her Y-Wing to pick up Babu Frick, and they fled the doomed planet together.
Look what you have made.
How does the Emperor get new clothes? The dark side is a pathway to fashion sense many would consider to be unnatural? This is definitely one of those things in Star Wars that happens from time to time where I think J.J. Abrams simply wanted Palpatine to look more regal after rejuvenating himself, and how that happens is ultimately unimportant. But I will point out that there are 2 minutes of screen time showing the Citizen Fleet's arrival to Exegol while Rey and Ben are incapacitated, so maybe a bunch of creepy Sith cultists ran out and helped the Emperor do a quick change so he could look his best as he ascended the throne. That is a completely silly thing to imagine, but it's the best explanation I've got.
In the heart of a Jedi lies her strength.
How does Rey communicate with the Jedi before? Only a handful of Jedi have undergone the training required to maintain their consciousness after death, so how are all these Jedi talking to Rey now? I've got a few ideas. Freddie Prinze Jr., who voiced Kanan in Star Wars Rebels and The Rise of Skywalker, said that J.J. Abrams explained that Rey was calling out to the Force, and then the Force replied with what she needed to hear. Basically, it allowed all those Jedi who had passed away a one-time pass to speak to Rey. I can buy that. I also think it's possible that some of those Jedi could have learned to maintain their consciousness after dying. Anakin didn't go through the training, and yet Obi-Wan was able to help him become a Force ghost as he died. Perhaps Qui-Gon did something similar for other Jedi when they died. Qui-Gon himself is proof that you can continue learning as a Jedi after death. He went from being able to manifest only as a voice and lights in the Clone Wars to being able to fully visibly manifest in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. This is all speculation right now. I expect we'll learn more about this in future Star Wars stories. Is Ahsoka dead by the time of The Rise of Skywalker? All of the other Jedi who spoke to Rey had become one with the Force, so does that mean Ahsoka is also gone? Dave Filoni has refused to answer the question directly, but stated Ahsoka's message could have been similar to Luke reaching out to Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. She isn't necessarily dead. She would be old, but still within the lifespan of a Togruta. It's also possible the Ahsoka series is setting her up for a more mythical conclusion. Maybe she becomes a new being in the realm of Mortis. She does have some of the life energy of the sister within her, so maybe she isn't dead, but also isn't part of the physical realm anymore. How can we be sure Palpatine is dead for real this time? In my opinion, we can't. Which is part of the problem with bringing him back the first time around. Star Wars has a bad habit of definitively killing characters only to have them return somehow. So I'm not going to sit here and say there's no way Palpatine could ever return again. However, as far as we know, Exegol was Palpatine's backup plan, where all of his cloning facilities were located after the fall of Mount Tantus and the Bad Batch. When he dies in The Rise of Skywalker, the energy he releases destroys that facility, all the Sith cultists, and the Sith throne itself. Symbolically, I think we should view this as the death of the Sith Order. But hey, the Sith came back after multiple defeats in Star Wars Legends too, so never say never, I guess. Can Ben Solo become a Force ghost? The fact that he fades away and becomes one with the Force after he dies suggests that yes, he should be able to. The Rise of Skywalker novelization gives him a line to Rey after he dies, "I will always be with you," to which she responds, "No one's ever really gone." While we don't see Ben at the end of the movie standing alongside his mother and uncle, LEGO Star Wars Summer Vacation does give us our first on-screen look at his Force ghost. I wouldn't consider those LEGO specials to be strictly canon, but in this case, I believe Summer Vacation is correct.
This is for you.
Did Chewie finally get a medal? No. I mean, yes, Maz Kanata gives him a medal, and it does kinda seem like she's finally giving him one after all this time. I covered this way back in my FAQ video for A New Hope, but Chewie was given a medal after the Battle of Yavin, we just didn't see it happen on screen. And he gave his medal away to a young girl in the Chewbacca comic. So in The Rise of Skywalker, Maz is simply giving Chewie Han's medal as a keepsake, believing Han would have wanted him to have it.
Well, let's find out.
Is Janna Lando's daughter? No, I don't believe she is. She simply reminds Lando of his daughter Kadara. She was kidnapped by the First Order when she was 2 years old, a loss that always haunted him and drove him into isolation. When he sees a young woman who was kidnapped by the First Order, who wishes she knew where she came from, he is given a new purpose, to help her find out. And maybe he would continue helping other former stormtroopers who were almost all kidnapped and brainwashed children. Who owns the Millennium Falcon at the end of The Rise of Skywalker? We don't know right now, but I'm going to assume it's Chewbacca. He spent as much time with the ship as Han did, but I also don't think he has as much attachment to the ship as Solo. I could see Chewie keeping the ship out of sentiment for his friends and the memories there, but I also think he'd be more than willing to loan it out if Rey wanted to take it to Tatooine for a quick trip. I mean, he let Hondo Ohnaka of all people use it on Batuu, so why not his actual friends that he trusts? Also, I think it's important to note that Hondo makes a deal with Chewbacca to use the Falcon and no one else. I think whatever happens to the ship from this point on is up to the Wookiee first and foremost. Does Rey's lightsaber change colors? If you watch the activation of Rey's yellow lightsaber, you see a flash of blue and green before the blade ignites. That is interesting, but I haven't seen any indication that the weapon is any color other than yellow. I don't believe her lightsaber is like one of those multicolored pens, it just makes the blade's ignition look cool. But that brings us to the end of the most frequently asked questions I've seen about the Star Wars sequel trilogy. If you liked this video, check out the ones I've already done answering questions for the original and prequel trilogies. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page for even more Star Wars talk. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.